And you're not a doctor, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And this was your first day at Chucky's, correct?
Yes.
And you were a server, not a bartender that night, correct?
Yes.
And you'd only received a few hours of training earlier that afternoon, correct?
Yes.
And just to be clear, so the jury understands, you're not qualified to diagnose someone as being intoxicated above the legal limit, correct?
Yeah, that's true.
And you've had no training in administering field sobriety test or any sort of measure determining what someone's alcohol concentration is.
No.
Now let's talk about what you observed that night, Ms. Lawrence. You stated that you served the defendant several drinks throughout the night.
Yes, I did.
Now, can you tell us exactly how many drinks the defendant had that night?
I know that when he sat down, I knew that he got a whiskey on the rocks. Later on, I know Jordan James sent around 3 whiskey and ginger ales. I know he drank one of them.
Now, if I might interrupt you there, Ms. Lawrence, if Jordan James sends 3 drinks to a table, that doesn't necessarily mean that Danny Dawson consumed all 3 of those drinks, doesn't it?
I actually saw him drink one of the drinks.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that Danny Dawson drank all 3, isn't that true?
That's true.
In fact, there were 3 people sitting at that table that night, correct?
That's true.
And so any of the drinks that you served at that table or any of the drinks that Jordan James sent to that table could have been drinking by any of those 3 occupants, correct?
Yes.
All right. And you don't know exactly how many drinks the defendant had that night.
Again, I wasn't watching and there were many to count.
All right. Now let's talk a little bit about what you stated earlier about the pills that Danny asked you for. Now, Danny didn't actually take any pills that night, did he?
No, he didn't, because I didn't know what they were.
In fact, he didn't take any other substances other than the alcohol he consumed earlier before he got on the road, correct?
Objection. Speculation.
Your Honor, the witness has already testified that he asked for pills. I think the counsel opened the door for this when they discussed it in direct.
Your Honor, the witness couldn't possibly know that the defendant did not take any other substances other than alcohol.
Can you rephrase, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. To your knowledge, Ms. Lawrence, did Danny Dawson take any other substances other than alcohol before he drove that night?
No.
All right. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about the timeline. Danny Dawson ordered his last alcoholic drink around 12 o'clock. It was a tequila sunrise, correct?
Yes, he ordered that.
And after that, Danny Dawson ordered sodas. Isn't that true?
Yes.
And isn't it true that it was in fact your mistake in serving him a pure grain shot of alcohol later in the night?
Yes, and I told him that I had messed up.
And that's because Danny Dawson had stopped drinking for the night. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I told him he had grain alcohol, though.
Yeah. And he had asked for water when you served him that shot earlier, correct?
Yes.
And you were the one who served him the alcohol.
Yes.
All right. Now, Miss Lawrence, you said earlier that you went out to the parking lot to try and stop Danny Dawson from driving home that night, correct?
Yes, I did.
Now, just to be clear, you don't know how fast Danny Dawson drove that night, do you?
No, I don't.
And when you went outside, you noticed that it was raining, didn't you?
Yes.
And it was already dark outside, correct?
Yes, it was late.
And if it's dark and it's raining outside, that decreases visibility when you're driving, doesn't it?
Yes.
All right. I have no further questions.
It was just a moment, Stephanie.
No problem.
We gotta fill these things out.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. A brief redirect before you put the scores on the ballots.
Oh, is redirect allowed?
Yes, John.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought that was absolutely.
Ms. Lawrence, you just told us about the defendant switching to soda or to water for the night. At any point in time that night, for how long was it that he switched to non-alcoholic beverages?
It was only for about 5 minutes.
We pass the witness.
Let's bring it up a recross then, Your Honor.
Yes. Recross is permitted under the rule.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Now, Miss Lawrence, didn't you tell me just a minute ago that he ordered his last drink at 12 o'clock, a tequila sunrise?
Yes.
And after that, Danny Dawson ordered sodas, correct?
Until he had that grain alcohol shot. Yes.
Which you mistakenly served him. Danny Dawson didn't order that, correct?
That's true.
All right. Any other questions?
Your Honor, we don't have anything further for this witness. Is it all right if she steps down?
Yes, it is. You're dismissed. Yes, Your Honor. The people of Midlands call Samir Lyons to the stand. Good morning. Will you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes, madam. My name is Samir Lyons. You can call me Sam for short.
Mr. Lyons, can you tell us what you do?
Well, I'm a college student here in Midlands. I actually grew up in the slums of India. I was lifted out of my poverty when I won a game show and I got $1 million rupees. I actually used that money to come here to get an education. But because of the exchange rate, I found that my $1 million rupees was barely enough to get me a plane ticket. By the time I came to Midlands, I was broke. To make ends meet, I had to get a job. I didn't have a green card, I was here on a student visa. So I had to work as a taxi cab driver, and that's what I do now.
Mr. Lyons, is that how you know the defendant, working as a taxi cab driver?
Yes. I know Danny because I've driven him home so many times last summer.
Did you drive the defendant home on the night of September 24th, the night that Vanessa Sullivan died?
I did.
Did you see the defendant that day?
Yes, I saw him a number of times that day.
When was the first time that you saw the defendant?
I saw him first at 4:30 in the afternoon.
And where did you see the defendant at 4:30?
I saw him at the bar which I normally pick people up at Chuggy's.
What was the defendant doing at the bar at 4:30 in the afternoon?
Well, when I got there, he was drinking a rum and soda. And right next to him, there were two identical glasses, but they were already empty.
With all those glasses in front of him, how was the defendant acting?
Well, when I talked to him, his words were kind of slurred already.
Mr. Lyons, do you know how the defendant planned on getting home that night?
Yeah, I actually asked him if he wanted a ride later that night, seeing that he was already drinking.
And what did the defendant say when you offered him a ride?
Well, he said that he didn't need one because DD was going to be the DD. I thought he was joking.
Why did you think the defendant was joking about being the DD?
Well, I thought DD, being the DD, meant that Danny Dawson was going to be the designated driver. He was already drinking, so I thought it was a joke.
When was the next time you saw the defendant that day?
I came back to the bar at about 7 that evening. That was when I saw him again.
And what happened when you saw him at 7?
Well, at 7, I saw him dancing. He was dancing like crazy. He seemed really out of it. The band was playing. He even asked me if I could teach him how to boogie. I don't know. He seemed really out of it at this point.
Did you see the defendant again that night?
Well, I did. I came back to the bar after dropping a few passengers off. It was 11.
And what was the defendant doing at 11 o'clock that night?
Well, I saw him at the counter. He was drinking a chuggy bomb. That's caffeine mixed with alcohol. It's an energy drink kind. And after he drank that, he said something to me and he went back to his table with 2 more of those chuggy bombs and a rum and soda on his tray.
And how was the defendant acting at 11 o'clock after he'd been drinking since 4:30?
Well, he tried to say something to me at that point. The first time he tried to say something, he was slurred, but I could understand him. But at this point, it was even more slurred, and I could understand him even less.
Was that the last time you saw the defendant the night that Vanessa Sullivan was killed?
No, in fact, I came back and I was outside in my taxi, and I saw him leaving the bar.
How was the defendant acting when he was leaving the bar?
Well, he came outside with Vanessa and David, and he walked past my cab. And I asked him if he wanted to ride back again.
What did the defendant say when you asked him if he wanted to ride this time?
Well, this time, he said no again. And he said it was because I drive too slow.
What did the defendant do after he told you that he didn't want to ride because you drive too slow?
Well, he got in the driver's seat of the car, his car, that is, and the other 2 also got in the car, and he sped out of that parking lot. His tires screeched, against the ground, and he fishtailed out, like there was, his front wheels went straight, and his back wheels kind of skidded on the ground. That's how fast he was going when he left.
Who were the two people in the car with him when he sped out of the parking lot so fast that he fishtailed?
It was Vanessa and a friend Taylor.
No further questions.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor, this question is received.
Yes.
Mr. Lyons, you've been a cab driver in Midland Center for about 4 years.
Yeah, that's when I first got here.
All right, and in that time, you've had the opportunity to ferry Mr. Dawson several times on his way back to the bars.
Yeah, I have.
All right, and in the past, you've noticed that Danny's been quite responsible about taking care of him when he's been drinking.
I guess so. That's he's given me a lot of rides.
In fact, you would characterize him as a frequent flyer. He's someone who would rather take your services than drive drunk.
Oh yeah, he gets drunk a lot. It's in my cab afterwards.
All right, and you've also known Taylor Hobson for some time.
Yeah, I know what kind of guy he is.
All right, and Taylor Hobson was one of the people who drove back with Danny Dawson that night, right?
Yeah, he was.
All right, and Taylor Hobson is also very cautious about drinking and driving, isn't he?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Your Honor, the witness has had experience with Taylor Hobson in the past, and so he is capable of, saying what he's responsible in this situation.
Your Honor.
Yes.
Your Honor, that foundation has not been laid. There's been no evidence that this witness would know how Taylor Hobson feels about drinking and driving.
I can lay the foundation, Your Honor.
Okay. Proceed.
All right, you've been around Taylor Hobson quite a bit.
I suppose so.
All right, and it's always in this sort of, bar atmosphere, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he's rather cautious about, not allowing people to drink. and drive.
Objection, Your Honor. This is still speculation.
We're laying the foundation on it, showing that, in the past he's noticed Taylor Hobson being responsible in the situation.
Do you have any other objection besides speculation?
Yes, Your Honor. If it's not speculation, then the only way this witness could know that how Taylor Hobson feels about drinking and driving is through hearsay.
Your Honor, if I may respond. This isn't necessarily hearsay, and this is not an out-of-court statement. These are past actions. These are things that have happened in the past, but not necessarily statements from them.
What specifically are you wanting to elicit from this witness?
Just to show that Taylor Hobson was someone who was in the vehicle with Danny Dawson, and that this person is very responsible about drinking and driving, and very cautious about this.
Your Honor, in that case, I have a further objection. This is improper character evidence.
Your Honor, this is actually an exception showing that Taylor Hobson has a habit of not allowing people to drink and drive.
Okay.
Your Honor, this is not covered under the realm of 406. For a habit or routine practice, this is something that someone does so naturally, such as putting on their seatbelt or brushing their teeth. This is not for how people act, what their character is like around drinking and driving.
If I respond. A habit is something that someone habitually does under certain circumstances. And Taylor Hobson, in a bar atmosphere, habitually does not allow people to drink and drive. Very cautious about that. So I can attest that it is still a
Can you
habit.
lay a predicate to that, of specific instances where he's reacted in that way?
Yes, Your Honor, you can do that.
If you can lay a predicate, then I will allow it as a habit or routine practice.
All right. All right, now, Mr. Lyons, you were once in the bar with Taylor Hobson, and you were having a non-alcoholic drink, weren't you?
That's right.
It was a non-alcoholic beer.
Yeah.
All right, and Taylor Hobson saw you drinking this beer, and immediately went to the bar owner and said that you should not be drinking.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Your Honor, we're simply establishing the circumstances, not necessarily the truth of the matter asserted, but to show that, this is what was going on in this particular instance.
Response that is not for the truth of the matter asserted.
Your Honor, getting these statements that Ms. Hobson said is the only thing that he has to show how she acted around drinking and driving. They have to be for the truth of the matter asserted, because this is what proves her propensity for being cautious around drinking and driving. He's absolutely using these statements for the truth of the matter asserted to prove his character argument.
Response.
Your Honor, this still isn't necessarily for the truth of the matter asserted. Yes, we are using this particular statement, as evidence that she typically does this under the circumstance, but it's not like a particular statement. We're showing Taylor Hobson's behavior in this particular circumstance, not a particular statement.
A response to that it's state of mind and not for the truth of the matter asserted.
Your Honor, the only way to prove her state of mind is through her statements, and in order for her statements to accurately reflect her state of mind, they must be true. Otherwise, they cannot prove his character argument. If he's not offering them for the truth of the matter asserted, they don't prove the character argument. If he is, they're hearsay.
I'm going to allow it in the state of mind exception of a rule.
All right. And so Taylor Hobson went to the bar owner, and she said that you should not be allowed to drive that night because you were having a drink.
Yeah, she didn't know it was not alcoholic.
Okay. And so this is a specific instance, though, of her being very careful about, being very careful about people not drinking and driving.
I mean, I don't think careful is the right word. I think paranoid would be better.
Okay. But still, you've noticed this in the past, that he's very careful about not allowing people to drive after they've had a drink.
Objection, Your Honor. I reurge my character objection. One instance is not enough to prove habit or routine practice.
Do you have anything else besides one instance, counsel?
Well, the witness has seen Taylor Hobson do this several times. This was just one specific instance involving this witness specifically, but he's seen it happen before in the atmosphere.
You haven't sufficiently laid a predicate for habit or routine practice.
Right. Can I relay that right here?
Yes.
Okay. But you've seen this happen several other times with different patients in the bar. You've seen Taylor Hobson be very cautious about drinking and driving, haven't you?
I don't remember any specific events.
Okay, but wouldn't you characterize Taylor Hobson as the cabbie's perfect wingman?
Yes, I suppose.
He would do this because he is so careful about people not drinking and driving. He refers people to a cab rather than allow people to drink and drive.
I mean, he doesn't refer them to a cab, but he's not very allowing, he's not very accepting of that.
He refers people though to a cab service. Says that they should take a cab instead of drink and drive.
Yes.
All right. And so you would characterize Taylor Hobson as a cautious person in this particular matter.
Objection, Your Honor. Character evidence.
I'm going to sustain.
Your Honor, I ask that the jury be instructed to disregard any prior information regarding Taylor Hobson's character.
I don't think you sufficiently laid a predicate to bring in that character evidence. So, jury is so instructive.
Let's go ahead and talk about Canyon Road. You've driven Canyon Road several times before, haven't you?
Yes.
And you would characterize it as a very treacherous road under certain circumstances.
I mean, if you're speeding, it's kind of dangerous.
Mm-hmm. But there's also other things that can affect the road. Rain, slickness, and so forth.
I mean, if it was very, it would be more dangerous, but I would slow down. If it's a slow, take it kind of slow. What do we say?
Now, let's go ahead and talk about the particular conditions, though, on the morning of the 25th. It was raining that day, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Okay. In fact, there was a flash flood warning on the radio, wasn't there?
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay. Anything that came on the radio regarding a flash flood warning is an out-of-court statement. It was played over the radio.
Response?
We're using this just to sort of set up the fact that it was a rainy night and that this was, these were particular conditions that were present at the time of the accident.
Your Honor.
It was necessarily for the truth of the matter. So,
Your Honor, may I respond? If he's using a flash flood warning to prove that those were actually the conditions on the night of the accident, that is for the truth of the matter asserted, and it's hearsay.
Do you have an exception to hearsay?
no,
I have to sustain it then.
it was still raining, though.
Yes, it was very high.
It was raining very hard, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Okay. And so this made the road slick.
that's what rain does.
It makes the roads more dangerous than normal.
That's why you slow down.
Right? And it also increases the possibility of people getting into accidents.
Objection, Your Honor. Improper expert opinion.
Your Honor, the witness is a cab driver. He knows roads. He knows what it's like driving under conditions like this.
Your Honor, may I respond?
So you're asking it to come in under, if it's not an expert opinion, what are you asking it to be admissible as?
It's admissible as the opinion of someone who has experience in these circumstances.
The lay opinion?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, response to the lay opinion.
Your Honor, this witness has no knowledge of the statistics about accidents occurring, whether it's raining or whether it's dry outside, unless he can prove that this witness has that knowledge. He doesn't have the experience necessary to give this testimony.
I'm going to allow this as a lay opinion.
Okay. So this would make the roads more dangerous, wouldn't it? The rain.
I suppose.
Okay. And it increases the likelihood that people would get into accidents, doesn't it?
I think it increases the likelihood that accidents happen, but you have to slow down.
Right.
You've got to-
I pass the witness.
Regret?
No, Your Honor, may this witness be excused?
You're excused.
prosecution calls Officer Ryan Foster to the stand. Good afternoon. Could you introduce yourself to the jury?
Hello, my name is Officer Ryan Foster.
And Officer Foster, what is it that you do?
I'm a police officer with the Midland Police Department, and I'm also a member of the Fatal Crash Team.
And what kind of training do you have to go through to be able to do that?
Well, to be a police officer, I have to go through the police academy. And as to my member of the Fatal Crash Team, well, what that is I reconstruct accidents. I kind of go back and I figure out what happened if someone dies in an accident. To do that, I have an engineering degree from the Georgia Institute of Technology. I'm an accredited member of the governing body of accident reconstructionists. I've done it for over 7 years.
So how are you involved in this case?
Well, 2 ways. I was the first responder. That was my duty as an officer. I was the first police officer on the scene of the crash. And then after the crash, I reconstructed it.
Well, what kind of information did you look at when reconstructing this accident?
Well, I took pictures. I took measurements of ruts and the tree and the utility pole that the car hit. I read affidavits, things like that.
And was that enough?
Yes, I got all that I needed.
How did you analyze the information that you found?
After I got all the information, I used physics formulas and things like that that are found in the Windsor and Strasbourg primer.
Is this something that's commonly done in your field?
Yes, the Windsor and Strasbourg primer is an article that almost all accident reconstructionists use to get their formulas.
And did you apply those formulas in your primer to the facts of this case?
Yes.
Well, Officer Foster, now that we know what you did and how you did it, I'd like to talk to you about the night of the crash.
Okay.
What happened that night?
Well, according to my reconstruction, the defendant in this case was driving down Canyon Road, and then he came to a curve on the road, and he's going 66 miles per hour and failed to navigate the curve and flew off the road.
Officer Foster, what's the posted speed limit of this road?
It's 35 miles per hour.
And after the defendant flew off the road, what happened?
Well, he was trying to get back on the road, and as he followed the curve while off the road, he overcorrected to get back on, and he slid across the road, and then the car slammed against a tree and a utility pole.
Was anyone injured in this crash?
Yes. Taylor Hobson was shaken up pretty bad, and then Vanessa Sullivan died.
Officer Foster, did you get a chance to speak with the defendant that night?
I did.
Did he say anything to you about a deer?
No, he said nothing about a deer to me.
Well, Officer Foster, what did the defendant say to you?
Well, he said that he could use another drink.
And what did you do after the defendant told you that he could use another drink?
Well, it became apparent that he had been drinking, and so I decided to perform field sobriety tests on him.
Well, what are field sobriety tests?
Well, they're tests that we give to subjects that we suspect might have been drinking and driving. There's a series of tests that we give.
Well, what was the first one?
The first one is we have them say their alphabet backwards. We start with just an arbitrary letter. I picked Q in this case.
What was the next test you gave?
Well, the next test is a little more complicated. It's called the horizontal gaze nystagmus test.
What is the horizontal gaze nystagmus test?
Well, it's kind of our best test. It's all external factors are they don't affect the outcome of this test. Pretty much what you do is you shine a flashlight until their pupils dilate. And after that happens, you have them follow an object. It can be a pen, a finger, it doesn't really matter. Just follow an object back and forth across their face while keeping their head still. If the person is sober, then their eyes will move in a continuous, fluid motion. If they are intoxicated, then their eyes will jerk as they follow in discrete motions. And so as they follow the pen, their eyes would follow it like this.
So the weather, how dark it was outside, nothing like that will affect this test?
No, nothing affects this test except the level of intoxication of the subject.
Did the defendant pass this test?
No, he did not. There was jerking in his eyes.
Did the defendant pass any of your field sobriety tests?
No, of the 4 that I gave him, he failed all 4.
Well, Officer Foster, what did you do after the defendant failed all 4 of your field sobriety tests?
Well, I placed him under arrest because we were going to take him to the station to take a breathalyzer test to get his BAC reading, his breath alcohol concentration.
Do you know the results of this test?
I don't. Whenever he got to the station, he refused to take the test.
Pass the witness.
Cross-examination?
Officer Foster, you mentioned earlier that you administered a test in the field sobriety test called the HGN test, the horizontal gaze nystagmus test, correct?
I did.
And it was your testimony just a moment ago that there's nothing that affects this test besides being inebriated.
Yes, no external factors.
No external factors. So the only thing that affects that test is inebriation. Is that your testimony?
In my testimony is that no external factors affect the test.
Is that a yes or a no to my question? My question being, are there any other factors besides inebriation that affect the horizontal gaze nystagmus test?
No, it's the level of intoxication.
Okay. The record reflected on showing the closing counsel. I'm about to show the witness. May I push this?
Okay.
Now, is this your outfit?
Yes, it is.
Could you turn to the last page? Is that your signature?
That is Ryan K. Foster.
And you swore to tell the entire truth in this affidavit, didn't you?
I did.
And you were aware that you could have changed this document up to 24 hours before this case became trial.
I was aware.
Okay, now, will you read along silently with me as I read and write?
Right where?
Right here. One. Okay, here we go. As is standard, I asked Dawson if Dawson suffered from any neurological disorder that would cause nystagmus. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
So, Officer Foster, you asked that question because you learned at
Objection,
Police
Your Honor.
Academy.
We have a judicial notice on a stipulation that states that no medical or psychological conditions impacted Danny Dawson's ability of the nystagmus test.
Yes.
My response, I'm not actually asking about the conditions. I'm asking about the fact that in the testimony, well, my whole line of questioning is in the testimony from the officer, he left out something key in the fact that the HGN test can be affected by a neurological disorder. I'm not necessarily saying it was. The officer completely forgot it. That's my point. And that goes to show the credibility of the officer in administering that test.
Ms. Foster?
Yes.
Opposing counsel is inferring that by not mentioning that this could have affected the test, it would lead that the defendant could possibly have had this problem. It is stipulated that the defendant did not, in fact, have this problem.
And you are welcome to bring that on a redirect, but I believe opposing counsel is impeaching the witness, and that's allowed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Mr. Foster, it was a white Chevy Impala that was involved in the accident, wasn't it?
Yes.
Now, you saw this vehicle earlier in the evening before the accident, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
It went by where you were parked on Canyon Road, didn't it?
Yes.
You didn't pull the vehicle over, did you?
No, I didn't.
Did you recognize the license plate of the vehicle as belonging to the Sullivan family, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And Mrs. Sullivan is the district attorney, isn't she?
She is.
And that was one of the reasons that contributed to you not pulling the vehicle over, wasn't it?
That was one of them. The other one would be that it was raining really hard and that I thought that they might just be losing control.
So in your expert analysis, as a police officer, at that time, the vehicle that was being driven by Danny Dawson didn't actually warrant being pulled over, did it? Because you didn't pull it over.
What's the question?
You didn't pull the vehicle over, correct?
I did not pull the vehicle over, no.
One of the reasons that you didn't think it warranted being pulled over, correct?
What's my reason that it didn't pull over?
Well, you thought that it might have been possibly hydroplaning or something like that, correct? When you went past you.
Yes, that's correct.
So
it was raining really hard.
So in your expert testimony as a police officer of many years' experience, the vehicle did not warrant being pulled over at that point.
That's correct.
Let's go on and talk about the field sobriety test that you administered. Now, as we've already heard multiple times, it rained that night, correct?
Yes.
And the ground was slippery, wasn't it?
The ground was slippery.
Now, one of the tests that you administered was to ask Danny to walk a straight line on the slippery ground, right?
Yes.
But even you had trouble on that slippery ground, didn't you?
Well, yes, but that's why we're always sure to give the nystagmus test as well.
Right, let's talk about some of those other tests. Now, one of those tests, as you mentioned, was the ABC test, correct?
Yes.
That's what you administered first to know whether you should administer the other three tests, correct?
Yeah, we kind of look at how they react, how they can logically put things together.
Officer Foster, can you say your ABCs backwards from Z for me?
Absolutely. Z, Y, X, W, V, U, T, S, R, Q, P, O, N, M, L, K, J, I, H, G, F, E, D, C, B, A.
Thank you, Officer Foster. I just wanted to make sure you could do that.
I'm sober.
All right, let's talk about that night. Now, when you started administering the test, the mother of Vanessa Sullivan arrived on the scene, correct?
Yes.
And she started yelling while you were administering the test, didn't she?
Yes, she started yelling.
One of her statements was,
Objection, Your Honor, this is hearsay.
Your Honor, this is going to definitely an excited utterance, which is 803, exception 2. The mother of the victim had just arrived on the scene, definitely an excited condition because of the condition.
Can you lay the predicate for excited utterance?
Quick. The mother of Vanessa Sullivan, Mrs. Sullivan, when she arrived on the scene, she was understandably distraught, wasn't she?
Yes.
And she was distraught when she made the statement we're about to talk about, right?
Well, she was screaming.
Screaming is usually someone being distraught. It's evidence of someone being distraught, right?
Well, there's a lot of reasons people scream. I mean, I guess that could be one of them.
Okay. Now, one of the statements she was screaming was...
Objection, Your Honor, this is still hearsay.
I believe he's laid the predicate for excited utterance.
Your Honor, if I may be allowed to offer a proffer, this isn't an excited utterance because what she was going to say was not relating to the event. If we're outside of the earshot of the jury, what she's going to say is that she intended to have consequences for Mr. Dawson for his actions. However, that has nothing to do with Vanessa Sullivan's death or the car crash, what she says to him.
And are you saying that one of the predicate factors for excited utterance is it has to be related to the event?
Yes, sir.
Response?
Your Honor, the particular statement, if I may make an offer of proof, the particular statement I'm about to elicit does directly relate to it. There's two different statements. The opposing counsel is referencing one, I'm going to be listening to the other. So can I have a little leeway?
What is it before you honor?
The particular statement is, my daughter is dead because of this maniac.
Okay, that was overruled.
Yes, sir.
So Officer Foster, one of those things that Mrs. Sullivan was screaming was, my daughter is dead because of this maniac, correct?
That's what she said.
And she was screaming, while you were administering these tests that require concentration, she was screaming it, Dan, please.
Yes.
No other question.
Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, brief regret. Officer Foster, as you've already mentioned, you spoke with the defendant that night,
Yes.
and you asked him if he had any kind of psychological problems, any kind of psychological conditions.
Yes.
What happened when you asked him that?
Well, he didn't have any.
Did the defendant tell you he didn't have any?
Yes.
Officer Foster, do you know the extent of the involvement of Mrs. Sullivan in this case?
Excuse me?
The extent of Mrs. Sullivan's involvement in this case?
Well, she's the district attorney.
Is she an attorney in this case?
Oh, no, she's not.
Is she related to this case at all?
Not directly, no.
Pass the witness.
No other question.
Thank you.
Your Honor, at this point in time, the prosecution rests our case in chief. We would ask for a brief 5 to 10 minute recess.
Yes, Your Honor, we would agree.
All right, 10-minute break it is.